Right now, as you watch this, you're standing trial in a courtroom that has no judge, no jury, and no laws, and yet you keep presenting evidence. You keep explaining. You keep defending a self that needs no defense to people who've already made up a verdict written in their own fear. I'm about to tell you something that will disturb you. You're arguing with ghosts. And the tragedy isn't that you're losing, it's that you think the trial is real. I know this because I spent decades of my life in that same courtroom. I stood there with my carefully constructed arguments, my systematic reasoning, my desperate need to make people understand what I could see so clearly. And what I learned, what cost me years of exhaustion and doubt to finally grasp, is this: most of the trials we subject ourselves to, most of the explanations we compulsively offer, most of the justifications we present for our own existence, they're all taking place in a courtroom that exists only in our minds, populated by judges who are really just projections of our deepest fears about not being acceptable, not being understandable, not being enough. But here's what makes this so painful, so exhausting, so utterly depleting. The people demanding your explanation, they're not actually curious. They don't genuinely want to understand. Because if they did, if they truly wanted to see you, they wouldn't need the endless testimony. They wouldn't need you to break yourself down into smaller and smaller pieces, translating your complexity into something simple enough to fit inside the tiny categories they've built to make sense of their world. No, what they want, what they're really asking for when they say explain yourself, is something much darker. They want you to confess that their way of seeing is the only valid way of seeing. They want you to admit that your strangeness, your difference, your refusal to fit neatly into their boxes, that it's a flaw, a mistake, something that needs to be justified and apologized for. And every time you comply, every time you scramble to explain yourself to someone who's already decided you're inexplicable, you're not building a bridge. You're building a cage. You're teaching yourself that your reality needs permission. You're reinforcing the lie that you owe someone else an account of your own existence. So let me tell you why you're here, why this matters, why you clicked on this video, even though part of you already knows what I'm about to say. You're exhausted. You're tired of performing. You're tired of translating yourself into a language that doesn't have words for what you actually are. You've been told your whole life that communication is the answer, that if you could just be clearer, more patient, more articulate, then finally people would understand you, accept you, stop questioning your right to be exactly as you are. But that advice, that promise that clarity creates connection, it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how human beings actually perceive reality. Here's the truth they don't tell you. We don't all live in the same world. I know that sounds strange, maybe even wrong, but stay with me. Every single person constructs their reality through the lens of their own understanding, their own categories, their own conditioning and fear and need for control. We don't experience reality directly. We experience our interpretation of reality, filtered through concepts and beliefs that we've inherited or built to protect ourselves. And this absolutely means that when someone looks at you, they're not seeing you. They're seeing their projection of you. They're seeing you filtered through their framework, squeezed into their categories, interpreted according to the story they need to tell about their own life. And here's where it gets painful. Some people, many people, they have very small categories, very rigid frameworks, very narrow stories about what's acceptable, what's normal, what's allowed. And when you show up in your full complexity, in your strangeness, in your irreducible you-ness, you don't fit. You overflow their categories. You break their framework. And that's terrifying to them, because if they accepted your reality, if they acknowledged that there are ways of being they haven't accounted for, they'd have to question everything. They'd have to expand. They have to change. And change feels like death when you've built your entire identity on being right about how the world works. So instead of expanding, instead of getting curious, instead of saying, wow, there's something here I don't understand, and maybe that's okay, maybe that's even beautiful, they do something else. They put you on trial. They demand your explanation. They insist that you prove your right to exist outside their categories. And the cruelest part, the part that nobody talks about, is that they frame this demand as care, as concern, as love. They say, I just want to understand. I just need you to help me see. But what they're really saying is, I need you to shrink yourself down until you fit inside my comfort zone. I need you to betray your own complexity so I can stay comfortable in my simplicity. Now, I want to tell you a story, a kind of parable, because sometimes the truth is easier to see when we look at it sideways. Imagine a master cartographer, someone who has spent years studying the Earth, who understands deeply and intimately that we live on a sphere. She creates the most beautiful, accurate map you've ever seen. Mountains rendered in exquisite detail, ocean currents traced with precision, the curvature of the Earth captured in elegant lines. She's so proud of this work, so excited to share it, because she genuinely believes that if people could just see what she sees, they'd be amazed. So she brings her map to a village. But this village, everyone there believes the Earth is flat. It's not that they're stupid or malicious. It's just what they've always been taught. It's the foundation of their entire worldview. The flat Earth isn't just a fact to them. It's the architecture that holds everything else in place. So when she unrolls her map and shows them this spherical Earth, they don't feel wonder. They feel threatened. And they gather around her and they say, "Prove it. Explain to us why your lies curve when the truth is obviously straight. Show us your evidence. Justify this absurdity." And she tries. Oh, how she tries. She explains circumnavigation. She describes ships disappearing over the horizon, the way you see the mast last. She talks about shadows at different latitudes, about lunar eclipses, about every piece of evidence that's been gathered over centuries. But here's what happens. Every single piece of evidence she presents gets filtered through their flat Earth framework. They take her observations and they twist them and they reinterpret them until they fit back into flatness. Because they're not actually evaluating her evidence. They're defending their worldview. They're protecting the story that keeps them safe. And the more she explains, the more hostile they become. Not because she's unclear, not because she's failing to communicate, but because her clarity, her absolute certainty about what she can see, it threatens the very foundation of their reality. And so they escalate. They question her intelligence. They question her motives. They suggest maybe she's confused, maybe she's been deceived, maybe she needs help seeing things clearly, which of course means seeing things their way. Finally, an old woman in the village, someone who's been watching all of this with sad, knowing eyes, she pulls the cartographer aside, and she whispers, "You think you're failing to convince them. But the truth is darker than that. They're succeeding in convincing you that your perception needs their approval. Roll up your map. Some people will never see the sphere because their identity depends on the flatness. And your job isn't to fix their vision. Your job is to stop letting their blindness make you doubt what you can see. Now, I want you to feel the weight of that, because this isn't just a story about a cartographer in a village. This is your life. This is the pattern you've been caught in, maybe for years, maybe for your whole life. You have seen something. You have perceived a truth about yourself, about reality, about what's possible. And you keep bringing that truth to people who are committed, deeply committed to not seeing it. And every time you try to explain, every time you present your evidence, every time you scramble to justify your own perception, you're not educating them. You're betraying yourself. You're teaching your own soul that what you see isn't real until someone else validates it. But here's where this gets even more personal, even more painful. Because it's not just strangers who trap us in this cycle. Sometimes the people demanding our explanation are the ones we love most. They're family. They're friends we've known for years. They're partners who claim they want intimacy, but really want conformity. And that makes it so much harder to roll up the map and walk away. Because we're not just walking away from conversation. We're walking away from the fantasy that these people will ever truly see us. We're grieving the hope that if we just try one more time, explain one more way, they'll finally understand. And then there's the courtroom inside our own heads. This is the one that keeps running even when we're alone. Even when no one is asking us to explain ourselves, we're doing it anyway. We wake up in the morning and immediately the trial begins. The inner prosecutor starts presenting the case. Why did you say that thing yesterday? Why did you feel so sensitive? Why can't you just be normal like everyone else? Why do you need so much alone time? Why can't you just enjoy the party? Why do you have to make everything so complicated? And we scramble to defend ourselves, to justify our needs, to prove that our boundaries are legitimate, that our sensitivities make sense, that we have good reasons for being the way we are. But here's what took me so long to realize. These voices demanding explanation, they're not actually asking questions. They're delivering verdicts dressed as curiosity. They're not confused. They're committed to their confusion because it gives them power over us. And when I say them, I'm not talking about external people anymore. I'm talking about the internalized judgments we've absorbed from a lifetime of being told we're too much or not enough, too sensitive or too cold, too weird or too boring. The exhaustion you feel, that bone-deep tiredness that no amount of sleep seems to touch, it's not because you're weak. It's not because you're broken. It's because you've been conducting a trial inside yourself every single day, prosecuting your own existence with voices that aren't even your own. And the relief, the profound relief that's waiting for you on the other side of this, it comes when you finally dismiss the courtroom. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in the quiet revolutionary act of simply stopping, of refusing to defend yourself to judges who were never qualified to evaluate you in the first place. Now let me break down what's actually happening here, the mechanics of this trap, because once you see the structure, you can't unsee it. And seeing it is the first step to freedom. We've been taught that we all experience the same reality and that miscommunication is just a technical problem. Like if we could just find the right words, the right metaphor, the right explanation, then everyone would understand everyone else. But this teaching is based on a lie. It assumes we're all looking at the same thing from slightly different angles. But that's not how human perception works. Every person builds their understanding of the world through categories. We need categories. Without them, we'd be drowning in chaos, unable to make sense of anything. But here's the problem. Our categories are not reality. They're maps of reality. And some people have very detailed, flexible maps with room for complexity and paradox and things that don't fit neatly into boxes. And other people have rigid, simple maps where everything has to be one thing or another, black or white, normal or abnormal, right or wrong. And when you show up in your full humanity, in all your contradiction and complexity, and someone tries to make sense of you using their rigid map, you don't fit. You overflow. You break the categories. And that creates what I call cognitive dissonance in them. It's uncomfortable. It's destabilizing. And people will do almost anything to reduce that discomfort. And the easiest way to reduce it isn't to expand their map. That's hard. That takes courage and humility. The easiest way is to decide that you're the problem, that you're confused or lying or broken or need fixing. So when someone demands that you explain yourself, what they're really demanding, whether they know it or not, is that you compress yourself, that you translate your complexity into their simplicity, that you cut off the parts of yourself that don't fit into their categories and pretend those parts don't exist. And here's the thing that will make you angry when you really let it land. The more you comply with this demand, the less seen you become. Because you're not presenting yourself anymore. You're presenting a translated, compressed, apologetic version of yourself. You're performing simplicity for people who can't hold complexity. And in the process, you lose touch with your own truth. I want you to think about the last time someone demanded you explain yourself, your choices, your boundaries, your feelings, your strangeness. And I want you to notice something in your body right now as you remember that moment. Do you feel that tightness in your chest? That clenching in your stomach? That scrambling energy in your mind where you're trying to find the right words, the perfect justification, the explanation that will finally make them understand? That feeling, that's not communication. That's not connection. That's defense. You're on trial. And the trial is rigged because the person demanding explanation has already decided the verdict. They've already decided you're guilty of being incomprehensible, guilty of not fitting, guilty of making them uncomfortable with your difference. And here's the most important distinction I can give you, the one that will change everything if you really let it in. There's a difference between authentic communication and compulsive justification. Authentic communication feels like expansion, like breathing out, like you're sharing yourself with someone who has the capacity and the genuine desire to receive you. You feel seen. You feel safe. You feel like you can be complex and contradictory and still be held. There's curiosity on both sides. There's room for not understanding everything right away. There's trust that your complexity has integrity even when it doesn't make immediate sense. But compulsive justification feels completely different. It feels like contraction, like making yourself smaller, like there's never enough words, never enough evidence, never enough proof. You're trying to convince someone who doesn't want to be convinced. You're trying to prove your legitimacy to someone who's invested in questioning it. And no matter how much you explain, it's never sufficient because the problem isn't your explanation. The problem is that they're asking the wrong question. They're asking, why are you like this? As if being like this requires justification. When the real question, the only question that matters is, can I expand my capacity to meet your complexity, or do I need you to shrink to maintain my comfort? And if the answer is the second one, if what they need is for you to shrink, then no amount of explanation will ever be enough. Because they're not confused. They're comfortable with their confusion. They're committed to it. And every word you offer them is just another bar you're welding onto your own prison. So what do? What does freedom actually look like? Because I'm not just here to name a problem. I'm here to hand you the keys that have been in your pocket all along. The first key is this. You have to grieve the fantasy that everyone will understand you. This is hard. This is one of the hardest things I'm going to ask you to do. Because we're raised on the story that understanding creates love, that being seen is a universal right, that if we're just patient enough, kind enough, clear enough, everyone will eventually get us. But that story is a trap. It keeps us locked in the courtroom, keeps us presenting evidence to judges who will never rule in our favor. The truth is, some people will never understand you. Not because you're failing to explain, but because they can't or won't expand their categories. And this isn't always malicious. Sometimes they're trapped in their own fear. Sometimes they're protecting themselves from the terror of not knowing, of not being in control, of having to question everything they thought was true. Sometimes your freedom threatens their cage, and they need to defend that cage because it's all they know. But regardless of why, regardless of their reasons, the result is the same. They cannot see you, and you cannot make them see you. And your liberation begins when you stop trying. This means letting your mother be confused about your choices. It means letting old friends think you've changed because you have, and that's not a problem. It means walking away from conversations that treat your reality as debatable. It means recognizing that being misunderstood by some people is not a failure. It's the price of being truly known by yourself. And that price is worth paying. Because the alternative is spending your one precious life translating yourself into a language that doesn't have words for what you are, shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you, betraying your own complexity for the false promise of universal acceptance. Here's the second key. You need to learn to distinguish between people who want to understand you and people who want to contain you. And the difference is subtle but crucial. People who want to understand you, they get curious. They ask questions from a place of genuine openness. They're comfortable with not knowing. They're willing to sit in confusion without immediately needing you to resolve it for them. They trust that your complexity has reasons, even when those reasons aren't immediately visible. And crucially, when you share yourself with them, you feel more yourself afterwards, not less. But people who want to contain you, they ask questions like accusations. They frame their confusion as your failure. They need you to be simple, predictable, categorizable. And when you don't fit, when you overflow their categories, they don't respond with wonder or curiosity. They respond with frustration or judgment, or that particularly insidious kind of concern that's really just control wearing a compassionate mask. And when you interact with them, you feel smaller afterwards. You feel like you betrayed something essential. You feel exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with the amount of words you exchanged. So start paying attention. Start noticing who makes you scramble to explain and who makes you feel safe to simply be. Start tracking who responds to your complexity with expansion and who responds with demand for compression. Because once you see this pattern, Once you really see it, you can't unsee it. And you'll start making different choices about where you spend your energy, where you offer your truth, who gets access to your inner world. The third key, and this is the one that will feel the most uncomfortable at first, is learning to let people be wrong about you. This goes against everything we've been taught. We've been raised to believe that being misunderstood is a crisis, that we have to correct every misconception, that we're responsible for managing other people's perceptions of us. But what if that's backwards? What if the most dignified thing you could do, the most respectful thing for yourself and for others, is to simply let them be wrong? Because here's what I've learned. The people who love you, who truly see you, they don't need your constant explanation. They trust that your complexity has integrity even when they don't understand every piece. They give you the benefit of the doubt. They stay curious. They keep showing up. But the people who are determined to misunderstand you, who are invested in their story about who you are, no amount of explanation will shift them. They'll take every piece of evidence you present and twist it back into their narrative. They'll move the goalposts. They'll find new things to question. Because the questioning is the point. The demand for explanation is the mechanism of control. So what if you just stopped? What if the next time someone demanded you justify your boundaries, your choices, your needs, your strangeness, you just smiled and said, "I understand this is confusing from your perspective. I'm at peace with that." What if you reclaimed the radical power of not defending yourself? Not out of arrogance, not out of cruelty, but out of a deep recognition that you are already legitimate. Your existence doesn't require defense. Your reality doesn't need permission. Your strangeness is not a problem to be solved. This will feel terrifying at first, because we've used explanation as a shield, as a way of managing other people's reactions, as insurance against abandonment. And when you stop explaining, when you stop defending, you have to feel the full vulnerability of simply existing without justification. You have to tolerate other people's confusion, their frustration, maybe even their anger. You have to let them have their feelings without making those feelings your responsibility. And that's hard. That requires a kind of courage that our culture doesn't teach us. But here's what happens on the other side of that fear. You start to find yourself again. You start to remember what your own voice sounds like when it's not constantly translating itself for someone else's comfort. You start to reconnect with your desires, your needs, your truth, all the things that got buried under years of performing acceptability. You start to build relationships based on genuine recognition instead of managed perception. And you discover something that will change everything. The people who are meant for you, the people who can actually meet you, they don't need you to explain yourself into comprehensibility. They're comfortable with mystery. They're drawn to complexity. They see your strangeness, and they lean in with curiosity, not demand for conformity. Now let me give you something practical, something you can use today, tomorrow, the next time you feel that familiar scrambling to justify yourself. When someone asks you to explain yourself, and you feel that contraction in your chest, that urgency to defend, pause. Just pause. Take 3 breaths. First breath, notice what's happening in your body. Where's the tightness? Where's the scrambling energy? Just observe it without judgment. Second breath. Ask yourself, is this person genuinely curious or are they demanding confession? Can they hold complexity or are they fishing for simplicity? Third breath, decide, am I communicating or am I defending? And if you're defending, if you feel like you're on trial, you have permission to stop. You can say, I understand you're confused, and that's okay. I'm not confused. And then, and this is the hardest part, you can let the silence sit. You can tolerate their discomfort without rushing to resolve it. You can let them have their confusion without making it your emergency. Another practice. For 1 week, keep a simple log. Every time you find yourself explaining, justifying, defending yourself, write down who was asking, what they wanted to know, how you felt in your body, and whether the conversation expanded or contracted your sense of self. At the end of the week, look for patterns. You'll start to see certain people always trigger the defense response. Certain topics always make you scramble. And you'll notice something else. The people who truly see you, they rarely make you explain yourself at all. They ask questions from curiosity, not from judgment. They give you space to be complex without needing you to resolve every contradiction immediately. And finally, when that inner prosecutor starts up, when you hear that voice saying you need to explain why you did that, why you felt that, why you're not like everyone else, practice this reframe. Instead of "I need to make them understand," try "I need to understand why I think their understanding is required for my legitimacy." Instead of "If I can't explain myself, clearly I'm failing," try "If I'm explaining myself to someone invested in misunderstanding me, the game was rigged from the start." Instead of "Their disapproval means something's wrong with me," try "Their disapproval means I'm outside their category system," which is exactly where all free people live. Because that's what this really comes down to. Freedom. Not the abstract philosophical concept, but the lived, embodied, everyday experience of moving through the world without constantly auditioning for approval. The freedom to be complex without apologizing for it. The freedom to change without justifying it. The freedom to exist outside other people's categories without treating that as a crisis. The freedom to be misunderstood and know that the misunderstanding says more about the limits of their map than the truth of your territory. And I know this is hard. I know it goes against everything we've been taught about being good, being kind, being considerate. We've been told that explaining ourselves is respectful, that clarity is a gift we owe others. But what if there's a deeper respect, a more profound dignity in refusing to shrink? What if the most honest thing you could offer someone is not a compressed, translated version of yourself that fits inside their comfort zone, but the invitation to expand their capacity, to build new categories, to tolerate the discomfort of not immediately understanding? What if your refusal to explain is actually the beginning of real relationship, because it forces people to either grow to meet you or reveal that they never wanted to in the first place? So let me bring this full circle. You came here because you're exhausted, because you've been trying to translate yourself into a language that doesn't have words for what you are, because you've been defending your existence in a courtroom that has no judge, no laws, and no possibility of acquittal. And what I've tried to show you is that that courtroom is an illusion. The people demanding your explanation, they're trapped in their own categories. And your freedom begins the moment you stop trying to squeeze yourself into their cognitive prison. This doesn't mean you become cruel or closed or unkind. It means you start distinguishing between people who want to understand you and people who want to contain you, between genuine curiosity and disguised control, between communication and performance. And it means you finally accept something both terrifying and liberating. You will be misunderstood by many people, maybe by most people, and that's not a failure. That's not something to fix or overcome or apologize for. That's the cost of being irreducibly yourself. And that cost is worth paying, because the alternative is a lifetime of betraying your own complexity for the false promise that if you just explain yourself well enough, everyone will finally accept you. So here's what I want you to remember. Here's what I want you to whisper to yourself the next time you feel that urgent scrambling to explain. I am not required to make myself comprehensible to people who are committed to misunderstanding me. My complexity is not a problem. My strangeness is not a flaw. I am allowed to exist beyond the borders of other people's categories. And the people who truly see me, they don't make me audition for the right to be seen. You're not broken. You're not failing. You have just been speaking a language of color to people who insist the world is only texture. And your liberation begins when you roll up your map, trust your own vision, and stop letting their blindness convince you that you're the one who can't see. If this landed, if something shifted, I'd be grateful if you'd let me know in the comments. Not for the algorithm, but because I genuinely want to know, what are you going to stop explaining? What permission are you finally giving yourself? And if this perspective is useful, if it's something you want to return to, subscribe, because I'm going to keep exploring these uncomfortable truths, these ideas that don't fit neatly into easy categories, these invitations to a more difficult and more free way of being human. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being complex, strange, and irreducible. The world needs more people who refuse to shrink.